Okay, tops, chops, sops. Here we're going to get an introduction to the SOP operators. SOP, which stands for surface operator. So this is where we see a lot of 3D geometry, and then we're going to learn how to convert that into pixels, how to get these to talk to different operator families, and then we're going to use some components for the first time in order to convert our surface operators into pixels. So I've laid these out. Similar to what we see with tops, we've got some operators that are generators that don't require any input. They kind of generate shapes, geometry themselves. And then some other modifiers that I find really useful that require some input. So we've got an error for all these right now, but I'll just kind of briefly go through all of these. So if we see box, sphere, and these are all kind of dispersed around the menu here. A lot of these are, to be honest, I have not ever used them. A lot of them are related to more complex techniques like rigging and bringing in models and animating sort of humanoid models. So that's some pretty high level stuff, and you can do like lots of really cool stuff that would be in a more advanced sort of 3D environment in Touch. At its basics, you know, these shapes are very simple that we can use for kind of simple geometries. So if we look at box, sphere, torus, tube, grid, rectangle, circle, line, and text. So just some tricks for working around. We can just look at box here a little bit for playing around with the view of these. If I click the little viewer active thing here, this then becomes a kind of viewport that I can scroll around. So if I left mouse click, I can move this around. If I right mouse click, that does a kind of panning, like up and down, just kind of moving around. If I middle mouse click, that zooms in and out. So I'm holding down middle mouse button right now. So by a combination of those three, we can kind of move around and see our shape. So this is not actually changing the translate properties of that shape at all. It's just changing the view of it. Some other cool view things we can do when we have viewer active here, right click, we see some things here. So toggle shaded wireframe. So there the view switches to wireframe, or toggle ortho perspective. So ortho view is all lines are parallel essentially. And again, this is not actually affecting the geometry, it's just affecting the view. Display options, so hit that, and then we can see the points, point numbers, point normals is right here. So this can be helpful. Maybe let's see wireframe also. So we can see the different points at each corner of this box and how the normals are kind of pointing out. Also, I'll just get rid of that for a second. If we go back here, middle mouse click. So just like with the tops, we get information about resolution, things like that. If we middle mouse click right here, we get the number of points, number of primitives, number of vertices, polygons, some bounds, and all these other like information about that geometry, which is really great. So here, there's 24 points actually in this box, which you would think there should only be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, right? Well, actually, for every face, there are points. So let's say at this corner right here, it's the intersection of 3 different faces, like this face, that face, that face. So each of these faces has a point right there. So that's like 3 times more than we think. Therefore, it's 24 points. Great. And that's why we see the normals. If you're not familiar with normals in 3D land, this shows us the kind of direction that the vertex is pointing. We can maybe see this a bit better with the sphere. So middle click. So this one actually has a lot more points. And to see all those, let's do display options, click, beautiful, see all those points there. Here's all the point normals that are pointing outwards, cool. So for all of the SOPs, you can always click viewer active, see some other information. Sometimes that is helpful to understand just what exactly is happening. So torus, we've got donut, great. So for all of these, we have parameters. So hit P, size, center, scale, anchor. So for sphere, for instance, we can see detail, so rows and columns. So if I made that much less, right, we start to see it gets kind of chunky. And we can see also, so now there's only 82 points. So you can tweak that to whatever resolution is necessary. So that's much more nice resolution, like so many points. Torus, we've got different radii, so outside radius. Actually, no, this would be the inside radius, and then how thick is it? There we go. So you can shape the donut there. You know, these type of things, orientation. So by default, the orientation of a torus is on the y-axis here. By default, we can flip that around if that's useful. So play around with like all these things. Great. Tube. It's like a hollow cylinder essentially. For this one, kind of same thing. We've got different radius parameters. So this would be a kind of bottom radius and top radius, and we can also change the height. Great. So grid and rectangle. So at a glance, these look similar. It's kind of like a flat square, right? And the difference is revealed when we do this display options. You know, so we can see that the grid also actually has it's a grid. It's a whole matrix of points inside that, whereas the rectangle just has 4 points. Circle, similar thing, right? It's just this flat shape. We can also do some cool stuff with this. If we look at arc type close, we do open arc, so it becomes just like an outline essentially. Arc angles. So let's do something like that. So that's basically just measuring little pieces of the pie by changing the angle. Closed arc, there we go. So we can create different shapes like that. Line is just what it says, a line. By default, it has 2 points. Right here at the start and end. We can increase that to however many we need it to be. So there's 100, whatever, 20. So that, by default, it gets distributed evenly along the length of the line. We can change the coordinates for the beginning and ending points here. Like so. Okay, cool. And then text, so it's similar to text top. Let's do polar bear. Cool. So we can see this exists in 3D space. This is also just a kind of a flat geometry. And then lots of options down there. So those are some of the basic generators. If we look, maybe let's not worry about the modifiers quite yet. Let's look at how we can translate these things, or I shouldn't say translate, convert this geometry into pixels that we can see and play with in tops. So let's just do maybe a box. Okay, there's our beautiful box. So to convert these to pixels, we need to get into CompLand here, and we need 3 things. We need the geometry, and a camera, and a light. So So we're going to create our own little 3D environment here. I could just click one at a time and then kind of open this up again, or I could also hold down Control, hit camera, geometry, light, and then those all kind of like came out right there. Great. And I just have a certain way. I like to kind of put cam and light over here, geometry like right here. Okay, cool. And then also we need a render top. And then by default, RenderTop is looking at light cam and geo. There's this torus right there, which is rendering by default. And that's because if we zoom in, geo is actually, like all these components are actually sort of containing other things inside of themselves. So there's actually a torus SOP inside the geo. Then let's not do that. So that just erase that. Okay. I want to display this box. So a few ways we can do this actually. Actually from here I could just right click and get my geometry. And when I do that, the box is going into the geo and we see an in SOP and an out SOP. And then that gets rendered by my RenderTop. Okay, great. And maybe I want to do, just so it's a little more visibly a 3D thing on the geo, I can rotate, something like that. Cool, whatever. Okay, that's great. Another way I could have done that, if I just delete that, I could, I'm gonna, whatever, I'll just delete that. I could go into my geo, delete that, and I could create my SOP stuff inside here if I want to. So that's up to you. I kind of, depends on how complex the SOP network is going to be. If it's not too much, I'll keep it out here. If it gets like really complex, maybe it's makes more sense to kind of nest it inside the geo. But one more problem, my box SOP is inside here, but it's not showing up anymore. What's the problem? And that's because we need to turn on two flags, this display flag and render flag. So display, let me just turn this on. Display flag causes it to be displayed in the geo, and the render flag allows it to be rendered. Cool, okay. And let me do this again. I'll rotate. Okay, cool. So there's different ways we could do that, and actually, you know what? I kind of prefer to do it this other way. So I'm gonna plop this right here. Let's just get a box. You can do this in by hand also. If we go in, out, I could, put other modifying stuff here if I want to. Make sure those are both on. When I did that in SOP, this created this inlet. Okay, perfect. Okay, beautiful. So this type of network is the bare bones, simplest way to start with some sort of geometry and convert it into pixels. So I might go ahead and add like a null at the end, hit that so it shows up in the back. Camera, we won't look too much at this right now, but we can move the camera forwards, backwards, whatever. We can rotate the camera a little bit. Lighting, we can do some tricks. We can, move the light around. Okay, that's cool. Kind of move it up. The light, we can dim it. We can actually go beyond one also if we do, like, we can type in other values. There's different types of lights, which I won't really be concerned with right now, but if you want to play around with that, feel free. And also, we can just get a little peek at the mats. So mat stands for materials. So let's do Fong is kind of the most standard type of material. So this applies a material to our geometry. A torus is depicted here, but this doesn't have any actual geometry information. It's purely about what sort of color the geometry has, what sort of texture. So if I hit the Phong mat, hit P, I get all this information about different types of texture maps, which we'll learn about later. But right now, all I care about is the diffuse parameter. So by default, it's this sort of blah gray color. So let's do something kind of cool. Let's do like, I love it. Okay, nice pink color, beautiful. And then that gives that particular diffuse color map onto our geometry. Cool. Okay. So let's have a look. Some other views that we can have here. So all of, like everything you've kind of seen in TouchLiner so far is technically the network view. If we go over here, this little triangle, pane type. So we're looking at network editor right now. We could also look at geometry viewer. And then I kind of move around this in the same way I can move around the viewer, like left mouse, right mouse, middle mouse to zoom in and out. And so this gives us a view of our little 3D universe. We can see there's my camera, here's my light hanging out right here, and then there's my geometry. So all of the different geometry stuff that I have in my universe is going to show up here. So that's super useful too, to get a kind of view of how everything fits together. I could also watch this at the same time as I'm looking at my network. If we go up here on the right, pane options, I can split in different ways, split left, right, top, bottom. So let's do left, right. And so each of these panes has this pane type, so I can get network over here. I mean, I could do two different geometry viewers if I want to, but let's do network editor right here, and then over here we'll keep looking at geometry viewer. So just to kind of show, if I get the camera, see the camera highlights over here, and then I can, you know, start to move the camera, and you can kind of see how that moves around. That's kind of cool to see. And let's do a torus also. Okay. So how should we do this? Let's do a couple ways we could do this. Let's say I want this geo to be showing all of this geometry here. So I need to kind of merge these in some sort of a way. So there's a couple things we can do. Let's do a merge. I can see now the box is kind of snuggled in the middle of our donut. Let's change this a little bit. Make that a little skinnier. Okay, cool. Okay, so that looks fine. You know, I could also do something, you know, instead of doing the rotate right here in the geo, I could insert operator. I could use maybe a transform. And as I transform, let's do like, oops, not on the Y. There we go. Okay, that's cool. So that's a kind of like rotating ring. All right. That's fine. What if I wanted the ring to be a different color, though? Each geo can only have one material assigned to it. So if I wanted the torus to have a different material assigned to it, I actually need to make a different geo. So let's do this over. I'm going to right click. I'm going to get another geometry. I'm going to copy this. And I'm going to drag this onto my geo. I'm going to use it as a material. And for this one, let's do like a bluish something. Okay, so now I've got two geos. We can see they're both pointing to render. I could have multiple cameras, multiple lights, but this one camera is giving the data to render, and that's what's rendering. The light is going to render. So I could have as many different geos as I want, and these could all have different parameters, different materials. So maybe here I liked it a little bit better when it was a little bit off center like that. That's kind of cool. Okay, cool. So if we look at render, so by default, this is saying, so a render can only render one camera at a time, because that's the kind of which camera view it's going to convert to pixels. But this geometry star, lights star, that says it's going to render every geo that's out there. It's going to render every single light that's out there. If I wanted to select certain operators, I could do something like just type in geo1. And now it is not rendering geo2, it's only rendering geo1, and vice versa. Or if I want to do all of it, I mean, if I had like 10 geos, let's say, I could do something like geo1 through 2 to only like do a certain section of ones. But that's maybe good for part 1. Okay.